start by introducing myself, and then I will get a feel for who is in the crowd and how you fit into the process that we'll be discussing today. My name is Jackie J, and I am a professor in the history department. I am also stepping in for Jennifer Weiss, who fulfilled the job of co-chair very ably of the Academic Assessment and Planning Committee, APAC. And for those of you who've worked with Jennifer in the past, you know that these are really big shoes to fill. And so I am learning quickly. I had the opportunity before she left for Ball State to start working with her and Tan Lee on the SACS response. And so for those of you who were part of the process of writing annual reviews last year and then had to do the frantic shuffle after the SACS response, everybody who was part of that is nodding vociferously. I saw all of that amazing work that you did. And we put together the SACS response, and that went off in July. So I did have some of the summer to start familiarizing myself with the process. I know what you've gone through, and part of our purpose here today is to talk about where we go from here. And so to get a sense of who all of you are, the people who are nodding, you are people who have already prepared reports and were part of that process last year. Can you guys raise your hands? So there are quite a few of you who know exactly what I'm talking about. How many of you will be preparing reports either this year or at some point in the future but haven't been part of that? Okay, so for some of you this will be a fairly new process. And how many people are here because this sounded interesting or they wanted a professional development or, yeah. They do advertise these broadly for EKU, and so I was not sure if there would be any people who walked into this room inadvertently without knowing what they were getting into. The fact that this is a full house is really gratifying. They originally had us scheduled in the little conference room across the hall, and then Rusty says, my gosh, we have 45 people registered. We need to readjust. And so the fact that you guys are all here and do take this seriously is really heartening. So just very briefly, we will highlight where what we're doing today fits into the big picture. And so what we're doing is this bottom box. So assurance of student learning, academic program assessment. That's where a lot of us fit in. Looking at our academic programs and writing the reports, those track data reports that go in October to assess how we have done in meeting our objectives. How many people here are from the administrative side of things? Few people. And so the process that you guys go through is essentially the same process. You've got the same kinds of objectives that either are focused on student outcomes or on the general efficiency of your unit. But essentially you guys do the same thing, so this should be helpful for you as well. So this is the nuts and bolts. Preparing those reports and assessing our programs. We also have assessment, general education, and of course the QEP, and then the professional program accreditation. This falls under institutional effectiveness, and Tan Lee Wasson is the head of all of that. Then within the APAC committee, which is a group of individuals from across the university, the annual planning and assessment committee, after you guys submit your reports, we then gather. We've got 3 day-long work groups, and we read through them and we evaluate them. And then we'll get feedback based on your reports. So just as our students go through an assessment process, this goes through an assessment process. So it goes. But I found, looking at some of the past reports, this is a really useful part of the process because these people who are looking at your reports take it seriously and want to give you the best feedback possible. And one of the pieces of documentation that you have, which, let's see, I might not actually have that, but that's the 2-page that is stapled, and that is, yes, that one, right? And so in the interest of full transparency, this is the rubric that the committee will use when they're looking at your reports. So as you're thinking about what you put into TrackDat, at the outside end, this is what they'll be looking for. And so this will be very useful for you as you're preparing to think about what will be looked for at the other end. So all of that then fits under the strategic plan, which itself fits under our broader mission at EKU of supporting students, and particularly as a school of opportunity. So it is part of the big picture. And here's the process that we call assurance of learning. And although the term might not be familiar, what we do is familiar to all of us, I think. We start out with our plan. And the greatest value of how we do it here at EKU, I think, is that the plans are bottom up. They're not mandated from above, and we tell each academic program and department, this is what we want your students to achieve. But rather, we, as faculty, as administrators, as unit heads, or whatever role we might be in, we're coming up with those objectives. So we know what our students, or at least we hope we know, what our students need, and we can set those objectives and outcomes as departments and programs. So first we decide what would we like our students to achieve, what are our objectives and outcomes. Then we teach, we implement, and then we start assessing and analyzing. And there are a variety of assessment and evaluation tools that different departments and programs put into place. And the part of the puzzle that we'll be looking at today is then what do we do with that data as we take in our assessment results. And for example, in the history department, year after year, our assessment results show that students are really bad at formatting citations. It's our constant struggle. So then how do we use that? What do we do with it? How do we try to make that so that students can reach the objectives that we've set for them? And here's what SACS is expecting of us out of that reporting process. So this comes from the SACS documentation. The institution identifies expected outcomes, assesses the extent to which it achieves these outcomes, and provides evidence of improvement based on analysis of the results in each of the following areas. And so then it lists the areas, the educational programs, and the various support services. And as we received the feedback from SACS, first in the off-site visit and then in the on-site visit in February of last year, we were told that what we needed to work on was the last part of this, the evidence of improvement. So not just saying this is what we did, but documenting this is what we did. And for us, we often talk about evidence of improvement in terms of meaningful change. So as you're writing your TrackDat reports, your annual planning and progress reports, this is the meaningful change part of the puzzle. And meaningful change uses those results, closes the loop, and details what action has been carried out to improve student success, to help students reach those outcomes. So what specific modifications or improvements did each department or unit put into place based on the assessment results to try to meet those objectives? And here was the recommendation from SACS. At the time of its review, the institution is responsible for providing evidence of improvement based on the analysis of the assessment results, as opposed to a plan for improvement. So they didn't just want to see, here's what we're going to do in order to try to meet objectives where we might be falling short, but rather they wanted to see actual evidence of what we had done, and they wanted to see documentation of that. So we needed to document and provide evidence. And there were a series of workshops in the spring, which some of you participated in, where everything was backtracked and you had to go back in to TrackDat and start uploading that evidence as a result of the SACS recommendation. And we don't have the final report and decision back from SACS yet, but early indicators suggest that we are on the right track. So keep your fingers crossed and hope that what we did will satisfy, but we're going to keep going in this direction because it seems to be the right direction from what we understand. Are there any questions or comments at this point? And this PowerPoint will be available for you after the session. Yeah. So I think looking at a concrete example will help us talk through some of this. And the concrete example, naturally, since I'm from history, I've chosen to look at history. And this is what came out of the spring workshops. So after We were told you need to identify meaningful change where there was evidence of improvement. This is what we did. And those revised reports were published on May 1st. You can see the timestamp here is April 12th, 2017. And as Tammy and Jennifer and I were working through all of this, it was incredibly impressive what people had done. But at the same time, we did see a few areas where there is room for improvement, or there is room for improvement. Continuous improvement, right? And so, what I'm going to do, well, first of all, how many of you have actually seen track data reports in this format? So there is the possibility at the end of the process, after you've entered everything in, if you've got your uploading evidence to track data file, you can go to the reports link and you can run the report and see what it comes out as at the other end. So when you enter it in, it's in all of these boxes, and then track data produces it into something like this. And this is the kind of documentation that went forward to SACS as the response, and they turned them into these 4-column reports. And so when you're looking at the track data report, since everything is individualized, it's sometimes hard to see the connections between different columns. And that was one area where we saw room for improvement among others. So take just a few minutes and look at what we did here and think about, as an outside viewer, for me in history, I know exactly what's going on here. But as an outside viewer, what would you like to see to make this even better? Thinking about this from the perspective of a SACS response, or being able to tell your story effectively as to the change you made. And we won't be offended. We've already talked through a lot of this. We know what we need to do.
So looking at this here, your assessment method was basically a questionnaire, but in the results section, I don't see any results of that questionnaire. So, yeah, so that's why I'm curious.
Yes, exactly. And part of the emphasis in the spring workshops was connecting your meaningful change to your objectives, but not necessarily the existing assessment methods. And so that was a problem that recurred in a number of places, that we were so focused on getting that evidence of change in that it didn't necessarily connect to existing methods. And so some of that was a little hazier than it should have been. So in this particular case, what was the motivation for change? It was more anecdotal. It was discussions with students rather than these student surveys, whereas ideally, your change is going to be motivated by the analysis of the assessment methods. And so moving forward, because we're not backtracking so much, we can be very conscious about making sure that the meaningful change we choose to report can be explicitly linked to existing assessment methods. And part of what was done in the spring, the directive was you cannot create any new objectives. Whereas now, because we've got a little bit more time, you can think, so if this is a really, really meaningful change, and this is something we're going to be focusing on in the future, maybe we do need to create a new objective based on that. And so moving forward, we have a little bit more time to flesh all of this stuff out, but that was exactly one of the key problems. Yes?
Okay, so I have done the fix the mess part of it, but I haven't done the first part of it because I came in kind of half the year.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so
Thank you.
I don't know anything about putting your objectives in. So
Right.
here's my question.
Yeah.
Our program is accredited and we have specific objectives that are given to us by our accrediting body.
Right.
When I put this in, do I have to put all 9 of those objectives?
That's a really good question, and my understanding is no. Yes. I'm not sure. Does anybody know how many objectives there are?
They tell us how many objectives are minimum. I have an accredited program too,
Yeah.
and what we have to report is like 4 times more than what we have to report here. So I would never put it all in there.
Right.
We pick out, and what we do is pick out our objectives that meets our strategic plan. When I say that we're gonna have teaching effectiveness, what does that mean? Because we have to have that for the accreditation as well as the university. So then what is that? So then we look at our surveys of our faculty, the course evaluations, and we have a certain benchmark that we meet. you know, and that's what we have to do and things like that. So what we do is each new cycle, every time we go to a new strategic plan, we sit down and we look at where we need to go and what we need to do and fit some of those in there. Some of them don't fit, so we have to come up, you know, with other things as well and everything. But we don't have everything. There's no way I could do that. We would do, because track data, I'm really sorry, but it's not very easy to understand, and there's no way I could pull it out and send it to my accrediting body. They wouldn't get it back. So.
And typically what I've seen is about,
Oh, well, and see, we're the library, so not a program, so maybe it's
Yeah.
different, but she told us 2 or 3 each year, because it's the whole 5-year program,
Right.
so
Yes,
you're not
it
gonna
is.
put everything
Right.
every
No.
year.
So
And
the
so
strategic plan is a 5-year plan.
Yeah, and
Yes, it is.
typically I've seen on average about 5 objectives, and then within those 5 objectives, you want to have meaningful change, really elaborated meaningful change for 2 or 3.
Okay, so then, and can your objectives, as long as your objectives fit your strategic plan, can you have different objectives every year?
That, ideally, it's the 5-year plan. And so there is room to modify. In history, we did actually modify. We came up with a whole new set, and a whole new set of assessment measures, because our student survey was not really that great as an assessment measure. And so that's something that I would talk to TLI about. And are you Mary?
Mary, yes.
Yes, because you're meeting with TLI.
Yes,
To
I'm Mary
work through,
Clements.
yes.
Next week, we're
Yeah.
meeting and we're looking at everything,
Yeah.
because, you know, I had 5 coordinators. We have lots of programs. We have 5 coordinators, so they all do their own program, and we're trying to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
So,
And so in history, what we did was, just this past year, we reevaluated and we changed a lot of our assessment measures, not necessarily our objectives, but also because of the merger with class. That caused us to reevaluate a lot of stuff too. And so I would say, if you're looking at adding new objectives, get in touch with us and we'll work through that. But
your
typically,
objectives should
yeah.
be so broad that really what you need to be focusing on is the assessment, having
Yeah.
multiple assessment. We have like 2 or 3 assessment measures for our objectives, and we're not looking at changing the objectives. We are looking at, are the assessment methods that we've selected really going to, so that's where we're focusing on.
Yeah,
when
and
we
that's
meet
where
next
most of
week.
our change was too.
Yeah.
And so if you look at our objective here, content knowledge, they'll have content knowledge in a lot of areas of history.
Yeah.
That's pretty darn broad. And then the assessment measure, that's where you start to get a bit more fine-grained.
Okay, thank
And
you.
so our new assessment measures are things like students in our 450 class will have a thesis, as opposed to students on an exit survey say, yeah, I know lots of stuff. Yeah, I know lots of stuff. There are more and less useful ways of assessing. So that question of the connection between the results observations and the assessment methods, that was definitely something that came up numerous times. And then here, the connection between the meaningful change and the objectives wasn't necessarily entirely clear either. And so we were changing the structure of our program to make content acquisition more accessible. That was the purpose of the meaningful change. And so that kind of fits. It was a really big change in our department, but there might have been other changes that might have been easier to link more specifically to that objective of content knowledge. So there are a lot of changes that are going on in the university. You don't have to report every single one of them. You have to choose the ones that fit into this structure. And what we did, this is on the back of your handout, the handout we were just looking at. So as we were trying to process everything that had been done throughout the spring workshops to try to upload evidence, to try to show SACs what they were wanting to see, first Tanley, Jennifer, and I, and then the vice provost's office, we streamlined it. And we created a series of tables where we pulled out the most pertinent examples and noticed that the assessment measures column got dropped there. And so you could really see that connection between elements. And this was a document that went to SACs in this book. So here are a few more examples. Here you've got accounting, And this link at the top, this took anybody who's viewing this to the 4-column report. So they do have the 4-column report as well, but this is sort of our attempt to really show what's in those 4-column reports in as digestible a fashion as possible. And what they also were able to do, this came out of the Vice Provost's office, was they took those documents and they made them part of the narrative. So the documents that you were uploading, those then became part of that meaningful change. So you can see the link here for accounting. What's the outcome? What's the objective? Critical thinking. CPE exam results showed that students weren't meeting those outcomes, so what did they do? They added case analysis to 2 upper-level required accounting classes. Supporting documentation includes syllabi and a sample case assignment. And then within this document, those things become applicable. And as you're uploading your evidence, you can think about how do I make that evidence part of the narrative, so that it's not just you do this and tack on the documents at the end. You won't be able in TrackDat to weave the links into the narrative in this way, but you can refer to the evidence in your narratives in this kind of way. Does that make sense? And then on the back of that handout, for those of you who are not in the academic program department side of things, here are a couple of examples of what went forward to SACs of finance and budget and marketing. So this was what we did to then take all of the hard work you guys did and try to make it as digestible and convincing as possible that this change really did occur and we thought deeply.
Was this just, I mean, were these used just for follow-ups to these assessments? Because,
Yes,
see, I
and
have an
so-
accredited program too, and I think, you know, if I did this, I mean, they would want to see that what is the assessment
Yeah.
method, which isn't in here, so that
Right,
this,
so it's because it's clickable. And so this was their base document, and then all of the attached evidences, then if you are a SACS reviewer, you click on that link, and the document pops up in the document. Yeah, so that's how we sent it to SACS. And if you clicked on this link at the top of the page, finance and budget, the 4-column report pops up.
I see.
So they got it all, this was just how we processed it and packaged it to send to them.
So I had a question here. So I recall what we did last year, but
Mhm.
looking forward, will it make sense to move the meaningful change column to right after the objectives? What I mean is that these are the
Yeah.
objectives,
I
these are
know.
the things we have done, and then when the students took the exam, these are the results. Because if you put meaningful change at the end, it is more future looking rather than looking at the past.
But
I
your
mean, this-
your meaningful change should be based on the results observations. So here was our assessment method. We said, this is how we're gonna see whether X number of students can cite properly. They weren't citing properly, and so we integrated into our capstone assignment this particular exercise to help them. And so the meaningful change should be based on your results observations because it's what you're doing in response to those results observations. And so what really doesn't make sense is that the documentation for the meaningful change is under results observations. And that's just a TrackDat thing that pretend it's over here. It really should be over here. These related documents. But the related documents are the evidence of change that goes with this narrative, which is what we were able to do in the table to process it for them, but unfortunately we can't do that with TrackDat. But what we can do is we can upload into assessment methods, that's where your survey and your survey results would go. And that's not something that we're going to be requiring for this year, but it's something to start thinking about that we will start to implement. So if you want to put that in there, yes.
Are any of the surveys for this exempt from IRB because it's institutional, or?
Because we don't actually upload, that's a different question. We don't actually upload the surveys themselves, just the data. Yes.
Could you please repeat the question?
Oh, yes. It was a question about IRB and data and the use of results.
We have traditionally never had to go through IRB to give approval for any of the university levels.
Okay. University level surveys.
We don't for teaching evaluations.
No, exactly, so.
Did you put surveys and results of assessment methods?
I
So
think
just a certain, like just a blank survey.
yeah, with a blank survey or some kind of documentation, since that is there. Or if you want to provide the results to back up the observations.
Okay, so you wouldn't put your survey results in.
It would be more logical to put the blank survey here and survey results.
Okay.
Right, so you could put documentation of results observations and then your meaningful change within the same results observations.
I have a question back to the issue of timing and meaningful change being forward-looking or something back. Now, maybe it's just that we're doing everything late, which could very well be. But we get our results and think about them like right before we put the report. So we haven't changed anything. We might say let's change something, but it's not implemented. We haven't changed the course objectives of the class. We haven't done
And
this.
so
We've just suggested to people that they do what they do.
it can go back even earlier. And so as you are looking at, if we look at this document,
Okay.
this is, how many people are familiar with this? Those of you who went through the spring workshops, this is very, very familiar. And so moving forward, we have modified this to be something that we hope will be useful for you as you are preparing to enter stuff into TrackTask. And so this is a modified version of what you did in the spring. And so this can help you walk through that same process. And your first step is to brainstorm that meaningful change. And so at this point, if you are looking at change that was made in 2016, 2017, these are things that were actually implemented. So they will probably be based on assessment results from the year before that. And so you can say 2015-16, this data was collected, it was analyzed at the beginning or over the summer or whenever you analyzed it, and then the meaningful change was implemented. So this is meaningful change that was implemented during the past year based on probably assessment results previously. It could be that you get the results and start implementing it, or it could be that you're basing it on something that a particular professor has noted and says this is an assignment that I have done, and you can incorporate that in. But the assessment results don't have to be from specifically that preceding year. They can go back further in the past. Does that make sense? Oh.
The results we entered, but we still have to enter each year's results, even if we're linking our meaningful change to a previous year's results.
Right. So
So I would still enter spring 17 results this year.
right. And then under your meaningful change, you can refer back
I
to
can
earlier
refer back
results.
to the results.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think as long as your narrative makes sense, as long as when you process and you look at the four columns and the connections make sense, that's really what we're looking for. And so if you have, your first step is to really brainstorm what were those changes that were made. And some of them will link to existing objectives and some of them won't. And as I said here, Assurance of Learning Day would be a good time, since everybody's gathered together in one place, pick people's brains. This is going to be our focus for Assurance of Learning Day. What we're suggesting to chairs to focus on is thinking about this assuring evidence thing. And so you're not in the position when you're coming to write the TrackTask report that you need to come up with this yourself, so that you can gather some ideas, some syllabi, some instruments, assessment instruments from the people in your units and departments. So what changes were actually made? What did you do? Start there. And then work backwards and say, okay, what objectives and assessment methods can we link those changes to? And some changes maybe you can't link them. And so those ones aren't as useful, but hopefully there will be 2 or 3 meaningful changes that you feel you can write a really good story around. So that's step 1. Just brainstorm. And then identify the existing objective and an assessment method and data to which this is linked. And that's where I think in the spring, we were focusing so much on the objectives that often the assessment method kind of got skipped out. So now we're really making sure that all of these are fully aligned.
So the process we did in the spring will be an ongoing process for us.
That's what we're suggesting, because this including of evidence is now going to be something going forward. And I think this was a useful exercise to go through, and so to produce the most meaningful report of your meaningful change, I think this would be useful.
Make lots of copies and write notes.
Yeah, exactly. Any questions about this first step? So then if you look at the flip side, now that you've identified which changes you really want to focus on, your 2 to 3 changes that you think you can document, think about why was that change made? And this is now where you start linking it back to those assessment results. So what data suggested that this change should be made to help us meet a set objective? And this section here then essentially becomes your results observation section. So this is your chance to narrate that results observation section. And then your final step is to get that specific documentation that can be used as evidence of your meaningful change. And we've given a host of examples. You could probably think of 10 or 20 more, but things like a syllabus with the change highlighted, a survey assessment instrument that has been modified or updated. Modifying your assessment methods could be a meaningful change. Curriculum change forms, courses that you've added, catalog information, and assignments, specific assignments from specific courses that fit within the overall program. Those are all things that you can upload. And here, just a few things to remember as you're doing this. So the deadlines are there, and then track that tips. Since this uploading of evidence is a new piece of the puzzle, that's where the documents link comes in. And this sheet is to walk you through that process. So some of you have done this in the spring, and some of you this will be new. If TrackDat itself is entirely new to you, that will probably necessitate an extra training. And so we set those up. But if you are familiar with the process, but new to uploading evidence, this worksheet I found pretty user-friendly. And so you've got your documents, you upload them to the document repository, and you can see all of the little pluses and wrenches that enable you to add things, and then you then drag it into your related document. Let's see. Yes, I'll go back to. Then another thing that we noted that's really, really tempting is that directly related to objective link right there. And because in the spring there wasn't an emphasis on linking things to existing assessment measures, often people use that so that they could link it to the objective but not an existing assessment measure. And if you do that, when you run your 4-column report, this column ends up completely blank. And TrackDat just says directly related to objective, which might be true because this change was not related to this. It was related to the objective, but that's not something we can do. Each result, each meaningful change does have to be linked both to an existing assessment method and an existing objective. Does that make sense? For those of you who've done it, it makes sense. For those of you who haven't, it won't. You'll figure it out, I promise. I figured this out really, really. Necessity. And another very small detail, it's not intuitive based on the instructions in TrackDat, But if you are identifying meaningful change, and this is something that you're talking about in detail, you should note it as result open, further action needed. So even though you've already made the change, so that sounds like it should be result closed, because it's something that you are working on, that you've noted as something that you've been working on, list it as result open. And then once you've finished, use that reports function to produce a 4-column report in a format that you can then see those connections between the links. Okay, and here, this is getting back to that question, how many objectives do you have to have? How much meaningful change do you have to have? And in the spring, the direction was, it sort of varied as we were figuring that out, 2 to 5, 1 to 2, a number of numbers were thrown around, but ideally there were 2. And you notice on those charts that we sent forward to SACS, everything that we sent forward had 2 really solid examples of meaningful change. So ideally, all of your existing objectives have to receive comment. So you have to fill in every column for all of your existing objectives. But in some cases, if you are maintaining, you can say, well, we hit our goal, we're going to continue in this path, here's what we're doing to maintain, and you don't necessarily have to provide full documentation because you're maintaining. And Tanley and I talked through this to try to decide what is reasonable to expect from these reports this year. But what we'd like to see is for at least half of your objectives, so 2 to 3 of your objectives, this is where we want to see really meaningful change. So we've got a problem, this is what we did to try to address it, here's all of the documentation that we're going to use to address it. So you don't have to list and really narrate every single one of your objectives, but ideally at least half will show that kind of thought process. Does that make sense? Okay. Then a few final reminders. Write your changes in past tense. These are not things that you're planning to do in the future. These are changes that have already been made, even if you don't have the data to show that you are meeting the goal. Or we're in this intermediate step. That we assess the data, we see that there's a problem, here's what we're doing about it, and hopefully next year we can come back to you and tell you that we've seen improvement. Right? Provide precise evidence, so that documentation, as precise as you can make it. We've said, don't use that very tempting directly related to objective link, and then mark areas of change as a result. Final reminder, due dates, October 13th, which is indeed Friday the 13th, when I saw that. I didn't see if it was a Friday. Unintentional. And then December 8th for academic and support units, student success and administrators. And then, as always, you can contact Tanley or myself now as co-chair of the. Thank you guys so much for coming and for being engaged. I really appreciate that, and for your patience in all of this for us.